In the early 1930s, Britain was in trouble. The First World War had cost a fortune, and traditional industries were breaking up. Coal mining, cotton and steel used to employ millions, but by 1932, almost a quarter of all workers hadn't got a job. A million people lived in homes that were so bad they shouldn't have been lived in at all. These are facts we can read in history books. But what do people who were children in the 1930s remember about how they used to live?
I was born in South Leeds in 1926. At home, of course, all babies were born at home. I had an older brother, 3 years older than me, and we lived in a terrace house, which we thought was rather good because we had a back door and a front door. Most houses were back to back with the door straight into the street. We had a small yard and we shared a toilet with the people next door. We were very lucky. Most had to walk down the street to a toilet block and carry a key. So we thought that we were quite superior.
At Eden Camp Museum in Yorkshire, they've recreated a typical 1930s home, with all the family crammed into one tiny room and not a television in sight.
Larry the Lamb and Dennis the Dachshund lived in...
The wireless was the big thing in those days, with Uncle Mac's Tales of Toy Town, but not much else for children.
And as the farmer was a kind-hearted man who liked to see young animals about him, he didn't...
Well, let's turn that off. This is how we used to live all those years ago. You've seen the wireless, and that was a central part of our experience as children in the 1920s and 30s. We would come home from school and always be in the house ready for children's hour at 5 o'clock.
My brother was the great one for the wireless. He listened to the dance bands.
Pardon me. I sing the high note, I sing the low note.
I just do that swinging in between.
Henry Hall, Jack Payne, Jack Hilton, just like the pop stars of today, really. Being on the radio, we didn't bother about what any of them looked like.
As you look around this room, like, for instance, the bath there, it may look like something to you which you would like to float a boat on. But in fact, it was the way we kept clean. You simply poured the water in from a boiler, and several of you would bath in that water. And one of the things that I and my two brothers were always afraid of as we bathed there was that one of our sisters might come bowling in. You couldn't lock the door. You were simply there. There was no way in which you could preserve your privacy. You know, there were 8 of us, Mum, Dad, 3 boys and 3 girls. I slept for years, in fact, I suppose for 10 years, in a bed with my brother. We just had a huge balsa right down the middle of the bed, and that separated us and kept us, well, didn't really stop us fighting in bed, but just the same, it was intended to.
The house was always warm, always. That was one thing about terrace houses, detached or semi-detached. So each house kept the house next door warm. And there were fireplaces in the bedrooms, but they were never used unless you were ill. Had to be very ill to have a fire in the bedroom.
There's a hot water bottle. That was put into the bed, and you could have unfortunate experiences with a hard hot water bottle like that. When it got cold in the middle of the night and you put your feet on it, of course, you woke up with a start. This was not very nice.
Cooking was a cooking range. Fire had to be lit, then pushed underneath the oven alongside the fire and heat it to the right temperature. But it made wonderful Yorkshire puddings.
The smell of cooking stayed forever. There was always smell of cooking. I don't know if you smell cabbages cooking, but that would go right throughout the house, the bedrooms and everywhere.
I can remember when the electricity was first fitted into the house. I was about 4 or 5. Before that, we had gas. Father used to climb onto the table with a taper and light the gas mantle.
we didn't have anything, not one thing in our house apart from the radio that was run by electricity and the lights, of course.
When the receiver is lifted, you're automatically connected to a series of switches in your local exchange.
Telephones were in boxes on street corners, big red boxes. And I can remember even now that my mother was terrified of them. She was absolutely terrified. She would not use one. I don't ever remember. It took her a long time to answer my phone in the 1970s. But before the war, she wouldn't have gone in a telephone box. But my father would. And he took me and showed me how to make an emergency call. You had to put the money in and you pressed button A. If you didn't get through, you pressed button B and got the money back. It was quite complicated, but older people had a great fear of telephones. Don't know what they thought they were going to do to them.
These are the automatic alarms. In this way, every human mistake and every disturbance of efficiency are reported to the engineer.
I want you to turn straight over. Whether you finish part 1 or not, start part 2. Right? Turn over. Carry on.
School, for me, in those days, was something I was going to go to until I was 14 and then leave and start work. There was absolutely no question that people from the sorts of home that I came from, where there was very little money, we were, to be plain, poor. And so there was, university was for the rich.
I used to get rather bored with school when we spent a whole day on Mondays either doing cookery or laundry. And the laundry was awful. Had to be hands in tubs and rubbing and scrubbing, and then they had to be ironed with flat irons, which were heated round the stove, which used to frighten me because I used to say to the teacher, "We've got an electric iron at home." And a couple of times I burnt myself quite badly. I feel that nowadays the teacher would be blamed for that, but I got the blame for burning myself for being careless.
Another rare treat by the time I was about 9 was the cinema.
It was twopence, threepence or fourpence. We went in the fourpennies because my aunt used to pay for it.
And you go into this plush Odeon, you think you've made it, you know, here am I, going to the pictures, yippee.
Each different picture house would show different serials, so that if you became involved in something with perhaps 20 episodes, they knew that you'd keep going back to the same picture house.
You tried to go every week. Of course you couldn't, but you tried to go every week because you followed the serial.
I was perhaps a bit unusual for a girl. I loved cowboy films because my brother thought they were good. Somebody would come charging up